Okay, here's a quick introduction to psychoanalysis, specifically Sigmund Freud, who lived 1856 to 1939, and Jacques Lacan, who lived 1901 to 1981, who is also known as the French Freud, and is famous for his reading of Freud alongside structural linguistics. Very controversial as well. Psychoanalysis in general in academia, I've encountered it being criticized in various places. I've taken classes specifically on psychoanalysis, so there's a lot of stuff to say about that, probably separate for another video. For this one, Sigmund Freud, in one of his first monumental works, The Interpretation of Dreams, written in 1899, but he wanted to publish it in 1900 because of, whatever, optics, aesthetics. Freud identifies two central mechanisms operative in the unconscious. Condensation involves the superimposition of signifiers. Displacement involves the contiguous veering off of meaning. In the insistence of the letter in the unconscious, Lacan explains that condensation corresponds to metaphor and displacement to metonymy. This is where Lacan's famous claim originates. The unconscious is structured like a language. Of course, there may be an impenetrable epistemic barrier preventing us from really knowing the structure, and the structure may not be quantifiable. Although later Lacan's math themes present an interesting interpretation of how this, in the impossibility of quantification takes place. That's a whole other thing. For Lacan, Freud realized this, but it took the development of structural linguistics to fully articulate the connection. So, in the unconscious, condensation occurs when a particular symbol stands in for multiple underlying associations. In a dream, there are so-called latent thoughts, the unconscious wishes and drives, which are compressed into one manifest image, or manifest element. So the images themselves of the dream as they appear, what we call post-censoring. So we kind of have our, one basic theory about dreaming is as a kind of cathartic release of our, the fantasies of the id, let's say, the animalistic fantasies or what have you, and we have to censor these basically to not wake up, because I guess the purpose of sleeping and dreams is to that's a general hypothesis I'm just presenting here. Anyway, so we have the latent thoughts, which are the unconscious wishes and drives, and then they have the manifest thoughts, which is actually the elements of the dream as they appear in the dream. So displacement is the mechanism by which affect is shifted away from its original source and attached to a substitute. The latent content is able to be expressed, albeit indirectly. For example, in a socially repressive context, like homophobic Vienna around the turn of the century, the thoughts "I love him" could be displaced to "he loves me," then again to "he hates me." The original libidinal obsession, which is termed cathexis, inevitably returns as the paranoid persecution complex. Through analysis, one could trace the steps of displacement backwards to arrive at whatever fundamental fantasy unconsciously drives them. Once brought to consciousness, the subject is freed of the symptoms. Ideally, it's usually not how things actually play out. And I think maybe Lacan might say something like, we just have to come to terms with and, learn to live in a healthy way with our symptoms and with our fantasies and whatever. I don't know. I'm kind of in the progress of learning this shit, so to just conclude, I will try to articulate some key Lacanian insights. So the Lacanian subject is fundamentally alienated because of successive stages of castration. In the mirror stage, we identify with external images, the unified self in the mirror, and our ego develops. Anything, I am this. I am smart, I'm dumb, I am, any sort of affect positive or negative. That's all the ego. The ideal ego is the unified self that we see in the mirror, that we identify with and intensely love and desperately despise as well, because it's unattainable. I think a really good filmic representation of this is the movie The Substance. When we enter into language, we undergo symbolic castration, wherein the social norms and the structure of language itself determines our subjectivity. So, for example, we have, either male or female. We have these, literally in forms. You check out these boxes. I mean, obviously we've added more because of identity politics, and that's a whole other interesting kind of thing to analyze as to why identity, all these new signifiers are popping up and what they mean and whatever. But, I think it's a whole other thing. And so the signifier, it turns out that it imposes itself and oppresses the signified. Whenever there are two subjects, as in the mirror stage, there's always an implicit third. Oftentimes this third is language itself, such as English, or an ideological framework, generally, such as capitalism. This echoes later Wittgenstein's rejection of the possibility of private language. Meaning is given in a community. Even the mirror stage's self-image dyad involves this tertiary reference point. Who do I look good for? The imaginary and the symbolic realms make up our ordinary reality, and the real is whatever cannot be incorporated into these orders. I should also say that these terms, imaginary, symbolic, real, I think they're called the three registers, or general regimes or whatever. I mean, the names themselves can be a little confusing. To try to, I would just say, don't, obviously with all this structuralist talk and stuff, they are just signifiers that we're trying to work with. And the real is whatever cannot be incorporated into the other two orders. Some examples, some controversial maybe, would be like the experience of the infant in the womb, the oceanic, cosmic, universal oneness from which we are ripped apart. But I think Lacan would really say that we are, even in the womb, the mother's body is still internally fragmented and always fragmented. So another example of the real is trauma. That which ruptures and is unable to really be represented adequately in the imaginary or the symbolic realms. And I guess as a final kind of, I think Zizek uses this in one of his intro books to Lacan. A way of explaining the imaginary, symbolic, and real is through chess. So the imaginary is like what the design of the pieces is, so we have like horses, but you could also represent it with anything, from something modern, maybe like a military, whatever, airplane or some shit. You have the symbolic, which are the actual rules of the game, and then you have the real, which is contingent accidents that might knock over pieces, or the variable experiences that the individual players have had in their lives and their individual dispositions and all that. So that's a general introduction. I think this stuff is really interesting. There's a lot of interesting thought connecting psychoanalysis to like Marxism, and there's even like math and psychoanalysis is a big thing, film theory, and then general like mental health obviously is like, where it started and what I think should be emphasized as well. Thanks for listening.